You're mid-conversation. You've met this person before, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. You remember exactly what they do for work. You remember the slightly odd thing they said at the last event about their cousin's wedding. You might even remember what they were wearing. But their name? Gone. Not fuzzy. Not almost there. Completely, cleanly absent, like your brain never even attempted to file it. And so begins the performance. You angle your body subtly toward anyone else in the room, hoping someone will greet them first and accidentally rescue you. You extend the handshake a half second too long, buying time. You deploy the world's vaguest opener, "Hey! Good to see you," hoping the warmth compensates for the conspicuous absence of their name. You briefly, sincerely consider whether the building could catch fire right now, just as a favor. Most people have been there at least once. But for some people, this is not an occasional glitch. It's a pattern. A chronic, consistent, quietly embarrassing pattern that has followed them through school reunions and work conferences and family gatherings and every new social environment they've ever walked into. And somewhere along the way, they started to believe something about themselves because of it, that they were careless, or distracted, or that they simply didn't pay enough attention to other people. But here's what psychology actually says. And once you understand it, the shame loses most of its grip. When you meet someone for the first time, your brain is not doing one thing. It is doing approximately 6 things simultaneously. It is reading their face, scanning for familiarity, threat level, emotional state. It is registering tone of voice and trying to match it to social context. It is calculating the invisible social geometry of the situation: who has more status here, what is expected of you, whether this person seems to like you, whether you even like them. It is monitoring your own body, your posture, your eye contact, whether you're nodding at the right moments. And somewhere underneath all of that, it is trying to figure out what you are supposed to say next. Your working memory, the short-term cognitive workspace housed in the prefrontal cortex, is essentially a juggler who has been handed one too many objects. And into that exact moment of orchestrated chaos, someone offers you a single arbitrary sound. "Hi, I'm Kevin." Kevin. Okay. Kevin doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't trigger a concept, an image, a memory, or an association. It carries no emotional weight. It references no prior experience. It is, in the most technical sense, meaningless, just a sound assigned to a person before they had done a single thing to justify being remembered. And your brain, which is ruthlessly efficient and deeply prioritizing, lets it drift. There's a piece of research that explains this with unusual precision. In 1987, psychologists McWeeny and Ellis conducted what became known as the Baker-Baker paradox. They showed participants a photograph of a person and told one group that this person worked as a baker. They told another group that this person's surname was Baker. Days later, the people who had learned the occupation remembered it significantly more reliably than the people who had learned it as a name. Same word. Completely different retention rate. The reason is simple but profound. The word baker, as a profession, doesn't arrive alone. It arrives attached to a whole web of associations: flour, warmth, early mornings, the smell of bread, maybe a specific bakery you walked past as a child. Your brain has somewhere to put it. It slots into an existing network and holds. As a surname, the word baker arrives in complete isolation. No connections, no context, no hooks. It floats there rootless, and rootless things don't survive long in a brain that is constantly deciding what to keep and what to quietly let go. Names, by their very nature, are semantically empty. And your brain preferentially holds on to things that mean something. Think about the last significant event you attended: a wedding, a funeral, a reunion. You almost certainly remember the emotional texture of it. The specific quality of the silence in a particular moment. The smell of the room. Who ended up crying and who didn't. A sentence someone said that landed somewhere deep and stayed. What you probably do not remember is what was printed on the order of service, because your brain made an executive decision without consulting you about what mattered. And it was not the printed text. It was never the printed text. Names are the order of service. Everything else about a person is the funeral itself. Now here's where it gets more personal. Because one of the most significant reasons people chronically fail to retain names has nothing to do with intelligence or caring, and everything to do with what is happening inside their head during the exact moment a name is offered. A substantial portion of chronic name forgetters are people who live, at least socially, almost entirely inside their own head. Not in an arrogant way. In an anxious one. While the other person is in the middle of introducing themselves, these people are running an entirely parallel internal monologue. Am I making enough eye contact? Is this too much eye contact? Did I interrupt them? Was that laugh too loud? Is my handshake communicating something weird? Should I say something funnier? Should I say something smarter? What do I even say next? The name enters briefly. And then the internal monologue rolls straight over it like a wave that doesn't know it just covered something important. In 1973, psychologist Malcolm Brenner documented something called the next in line effect. In his study, people who were waiting for their turn to speak in a group showed dramatically reduced memory for whatever the person directly before them had said because mentally, they had already left. They were rehearsing their own contribution, editing themselves in real time, anticipating their moment. They were physically present and cognitively elsewhere. For people who live with social anxiety, or even just a particularly hyperactive self-awareness, this is not a temporary state brought on by public speaking. It is the default state of every social interaction, every time. They are never quite fully here. There is always a part of them slightly ahead of the moment, preparing, monitoring, adjusting. Which means the moment someone says their name, the part of the brain that might have caught it was already busy doing something else. If that sounds familiar, here is the reframe that actually changes things. You do not have a memory problem. You have a preoccupation problem. And those are very different things with very different implications. One suggests a broken function. The other suggests a function that is working perfectly, just pointed in the wrong direction. It's also worth pausing here for the people sitting on the other side of this experience. Because the emotional reality of having your name forgotten, especially more than once by the same person, is genuinely uncomfortable. And it would be dishonest to skip past it. When your name doesn't stick, something in you registers it as a verdict. You didn't matter enough to remember. That is how it lands, even when you intellectually know it isn't true. Even when you've read enough psychology to understand what actually happened. The feeling arrives before the reasoning does, and it arrives with a particular kind of sting, small, but pointed. Like a paper cut in a specific place. But here is what is almost certainly also true. The person who forgot your name probably thought about the conversation you had long after it ended. They remember the specific take you had on something that surprised them. They remember the way you described a situation, the particular word you chose. They remember the look on your face during a moment that mattered. They were there for all of it. The memory of you is intact and detailed and genuine. It just doesn't include the label your parents gave you at birth. Because memory is not a recording device. It never was. Your brain does not store experiences the way a hard drive stores files, as complete, retrievable, unchanged copies. It stores impressions and fragments and emotional residue. It encodes what moved you, what surprised you, what connected to something you already understood. High emotion, stored. Unexpected detail, stored. A moment that confirmed or challenged something you believed, stored. One arbitrary syllable handed to you at the precise moment your working memory was already at capacity, in a social situation designed to make you self-conscious by default, not stored. Or at least, not reliably. And there is something else that chronic name forgetters often have in common, something that reframes the whole picture. They tend to be highly associative, deeply contextual thinkers. Their memory is built around stories and feelings and atmosphere rather than discrete facts. Ask them what someone said 3 years ago at a party that stopped the conversation, they might tell you verbatim. Ask them what the person was wearing, they might surprise you. Ask them the name of the person standing right next to them at that same party, blank. Because their brain was cataloging texture, emotion, meaning, subtext. Everything except the label. This is not a malfunction. It is a particular cognitive architecture, one that tends to make people unusually good at storytelling, at emotional attunement, at the kind of deep listening that makes other people feel genuinely seen and understood. It is simply worse at the specific mechanical task of retaining arbitrary phonetic labels under social pressure. That is a very narrow limitation inside a much broader set of strengths. None of which means you shouldn't try to improve. The techniques exist and they work. When someone tells you their name, say it back immediately, out loud or even just internally, and build a deliberate association. Connect Kevin to a Kevin you already know, or to something about his face, or to something he says in the first 30 seconds. You are doing manually what your brain won't do automatically, constructing the bridge between an empty sound and something that already has weight in your mental landscape. It feels effortful at first because it is. But it works precisely because it is effortful. You are overriding a default, not fighting a defect. But the shame spiral, that low-grade, background belief that forgetting names makes you a careless person, someone who moves through the world without really registering others, that part is simply incorrect. It is a conclusion that was never actually examined. It arrived quietly, settled in, and started being treated as fact without anyone asking whether it deserved to be. You are not absent. You are not dismissive. You are not failing at paying attention to people. You are someone whose brain got overloaded at precisely the wrong moment, whose internal weather hijacked the intake process, and whose memory, rich and contextual and emotionally attuned as it is, simply has different priorities than a filing system. The name was always the least interesting thing about a person. It was assigned before they had done anything, before they had said anything, before they had become who they are. What you actually remember about the people in your life, the texture of who they are, the way they think, the things they said that stayed, that is still there. It has been there the whole time. That is what genuine attention looks like. It just doesn't always come with a label attached. So tell me, are you someone who forgets names but remembers everything else? Or do you think forgetting a name really does say something about how present you were? Write your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know which side you're on. Are you someone who forgets names but remembers everything else? Or do you think forgetting a name says something real about how present you were? Write your answer below.